Hello, everyone. How's everybody doing? Are you okay? Yeah? Oh,
Come on, you can clap it. Come on, you can clap it up.
Come on. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Just in case you're not sure where you are, welcome to Secure Onboarding with Google Cloud using Identity and Access Management. Here's your chance. Last chance, gone. They're going to lock the door. No, I'm kidding. I'm Michele Chubirka. I'm a cloud security advocate in Google Cloud.
And I am Elliott with 2 L's and 2 T's. I'm a cloud security architect at Google Cloud.
They only gave me 1 L. So this is an overview of what we'll be discussing today, but let's just jump right in. The boundary of cloud is one of identity. Why is that so important? This is a philosophy statement about IAM, right? And it's because you're not going to be able to create appropriate trust boundaries. You're not going to be able to actually secure your cloud properly, your cloud infrastructure, without having a solid identity foundation.
And the reason why that statement is really so important is because for old guys like Eli and myself, we remember the days when our boundary was actually wherever we had the biggest, beefiest firewall. Wherever our big, beefy firewalls, our edge routers and all that stuff, that used to be our boundary, but it's no longer. Wherever your furthest most remote worker is, that is now your boundary. Identity is now your boundary, especially in the cloud.
So let's talk about IAM in the cloud, right? Well, this is today's focus.
So we're going to focus here. So when you look at this slide, I want you guys, if you don't already have it on your agenda, try to find a session. Manish, raise your hand. Ahmad, raise your hand. These guys work in our Security Foundations blueprint. This is part of what we talk about in that blueprint. All of these steps are things that we believe that you need to do in order to create a secure, scalable, and self-healing environment. But the first three steps are most critical because the boundary is now the identity. So today, in today's talk, we're going to focus on unifying your identity. We're going to focus on establishing policy based on least privilege using IAM. And then we're also going to talk about setting up some guardrails around your entire organization using what we call organization policies. Those are the three things we're going to talk about in that red circle. Michele says it's magenta. I say red. Potato, potato. But that's what we're going to focus on today.
And I just want to point out, you are going to get so sick of hearing the following phrases: least privilege, separation of duties, and defense in depth.
Least privilege.
There you go.
There it is.
Somebody start counting, okay? Okay, let's get started with what is identity and access management. What is it, Elliott?
Yeah, I think I can take this one.
Okay.
So identity and access management, it really serves a great purpose because it answers some vital questions that our users are going to ask of us. Our policies are going to ask of us, and most of all, our security systems will ask these three questions of us relative to identity. It's going to want to know who can do what on which resources. The who, that can be a user, it could be a group, or a service account. That's the who. That is, we're going to define it a little better later on. Then the what are roles and permissions. What actions can the who actually do? And the which is the organization, the folder, the projects, and the resources. These are the things that you're going to be able to do these actions on. Who, what, and which. I need to see you writing that down. Who, what,
just
and
remember
which.
that. Memorize that.
Memorize it. There will be a test at the end.
Okay, let's cover the operational scope of IAM. What services depend on IAM? This is a trick question. All this and much more. It's everything. Everything is dependent on IAM in Google Cloud, in any cloud, right?
Everything depends on IAM. So every service in the cloud, all of these APIs, everything relies on IAM. In fact, IAM is one of those services in Google Cloud that we refer to as a horizontal service. What does that mean? A horizontal service means that all of these other services in Google Cloud, they rely on IAM in order for you to properly leverage these services. If you want to create a GCS bucket or if you want to create an encryption key, you're going to have the right IAM permissions in order to do so.
Now let's talk about some of the first steps. May seem obvious, but know your identities, unify your identities. What does that mean?
So one of the first things, going back to the reddish, magenta-ish circle, I say red. Michele swears it's magenta, but I think it's red. That circle on that one of the first slides that we showed, the very first thing on there is to unify your identity. Because most of our customers are coming to us either from an on-prem world or maybe even from another cloud. But wherever you're coming to us from, you already have an established group of users that live in some system somewhere, some LDAP directory, somewhere you have those users already located. So this first step in setting up and unifying your identities is critical because you need to make sure that you have a single source of truth for all of your identities. You need to know that I have a central primary domain that is going to control all of my actions in my organization as I'm moving forth and as I'm trying to set up this least privilege that we keep talking so much about. And we want to, just in case we want to create some type of federation, we're going to do that right here as well. So first step is what? Unify your identities.
And this is another important thing to remember. You've actually got two consoles. You have the admin console, right? That's where the super admin account works, which is like the root account in some of those other providers, right? And that's where you'll initially create admin accounts. That's where you manage groups and roles. That's where you assign users to administrative groups. That's where you enforce authentication options for users, and you set up federation and billing. And then you have the other console.
The other console is this is where you're going to roll up your sleeves and you're going to get ready to get with it. That's the cloud console. But it was kind of confusing to me because when I came to Google, I've been at Google almost 5 years, but when I came to Google Cloud, I had been a consultant for a number of years, supporting some of the other hyperscalers, and this was a strange concept to me, but the more I use it, the more I understand that from its core, Google is all about security that's built in and not baked on. So what we have here is we have a separation of these duties. The admin console is where you're going to set up these administrative rights and privilege and federation and all that stuff. But when you want to start spinning up platform resources, you're going to go to the cloud console to do that. The cloud console is where all of your cloud resources will be provisioned in the cloud console. You need to remember that. And if you look at take a picture of that, those are the URLs for the various consoles. One thing I want to say before we go further about the admin console is Michele mentioned the root account. So in some clouds, they refer to it as the root account. We refer to it in GCP as the super admin account. That is not an account that you're going to use for everyday administration. Chris, I know how badly you want to do it, but don't do it. Resist the temptation. Do not use that super admin account every day.
And another point to remember, the API is not enabled by default. In fact, most Google APIs are not enabled by default. That seems kind of inconvenient. Why do you need to do that? Well, it's a default closed approach that we have, and that's to protect you in terms of billing, so you don't get billed for something that you didn't mean to turn on. And it's also for security reasons, so that you don't enable things that you're not aware that you have enabled, right? So remember, it's default closed, and by default, the APIs, most of them aren't enabled.
You can tell that Michele spent most of her career managing firewalls, can't you?
Okay, let's talk about the most fun thing ever for me, which is the scaffolding, right? Building the house, the framework of IAM. And my favorite topic is resource hierarchies, right? And resource hierarchies with resource manager, right? So some of the things to consider when you're looking at and you're considering your resource hierarchy, it provides attachment points for IAM and for organization policies. There's this concept of inheritance, right? So it starts at the top and works down. And then projects and folders can be moved across the hierarchy. And at the lowest level, resources are fundamental components that make that up, right? So let's look at this diagram, right? You have your organization at the top, and then you have departments, which are folders, and then you have teams that are subfolders of the departments, and then you have prod and non-prod. Now, this resource hierarchy is your auditor's best friend. It's a way for you to create trust boundaries around in your identities, right, that help you create trust boundaries around your resources. So this is going to be a very good self-documenting way to secure your infrastructure and to demonstrate that you've secured your infrastructure. Think about PCI, for example, where you can create a cardholder data environment versus your non-cardholder data environment. And by the way, just something nerdy, this is based on ITU 1257 of IAM ontologies and taxonomies. I just thought I'd throw that out there.
That is super nerdy.
That's super cool for me.
I'm going to slide over a little bit. That was very nerdy.
And in case you were falling asleep during that previous slide, I actually put this into the context of Lord of the Rings. Yay! And so I broke up the kingdoms and the lands, the continents into Lord of the Rings so that you would understand this a little better. Maybe it's a little easier to understand, right? And bottom is the resource of the One Ring. I thought this was super fun, but maybe it's boring to you. Anyway. But now let's talk about some foundational elements. Because now that you've built your house, it's time to move in the furniture.
So it would be kind of weird to build a house and you start, the movers actually move your stove and your refrigerator into your living room. So that would be kind of weird, wouldn't it? It's the same with IAM. It would be weird to just start willy-nilly assigning resources and assigning users all these wild permissions without knowing what they really need to do. So one of the things that we advocate for our users, all of our customers to do, is to create what's called a persona map. Michele, ask the question. I know you want to. Ask the question.
What's a persona?
Good question, glad you asked. A persona is nothing more than a job function. So when you think about creating least privilege, you need to know who the users are that's going to be in this system, and you want to create an actual matrix that lays out, this is Chris. Chris is going to be a developer. A developer needs this role. So once you do this persona mapping, now you have something to go back to as your users as your systems begin to grow and to expand. You can always harken back to the days of yore when you created this persona mapping to decide who should actually have what type of access. So personas and persona mapping is critical for you to understand how you can implement least privilege in your environment.
Oh, you said it. You said least privilege.
Least privilege, I did. I got 10 more times to say it.
Yeah. Okay. And now, elements and functions of IAM.
So once you build your IAM, our IAM relies on these three areas. So these three elements. So we have a principal. A principal is going to be an entity that can access a given set of resources. Now, a principal can be think of an end user. It could be a service account, or it can even be a group. That is your principal. A principal can do nothing until the principal has access or has permissions. And the permissions should not ever be granted directly to the end user. So the roles are going to be, that's our collection of permissions that we are going to apply to a group based on our persona mapping. So the role is a collection of permissions, and these permissions determine what operations are allowed to be carried out on a resource. Now, I want you to remember this, that when you grant a role to a principal, I want to slow it down so you can hear this. When you grant a role to a principal, you grant all the permissions that role has. When you grant a role to when you grant a role to a principal, every permission that's in that role, the principal now has access to. And the third thing that makes up IAM is a policy. A policy is a collection of role bindings, and these role bindings allow us to actually do stuff. So you can only have one allow role binding per policy. You can only have one. But once you assign these, you need to make sure what you're getting into, because this is how we're going to think about our least privilege. If I don't know what my personas are, and I'm starting to create these allow policies, 10 months down the road, you've forgotten what you did, and now somebody has owned some user's account, and you don't know why. But it all goes back to these three elements: principles, roles, and policies. Know what they are.
Okay, now the different types of IAM roles, which include primitive, predefined, and custom roles.
So a primitive role is actually a throwback. These roles actually existed before there was even cloud IAM in Google. These are some legacy roles that were created to allow people to kind of kick the tires when they're moving into the cloud. But by default, these roles are they're overly permissive. They're very, very broad. And these roles are owner, editor, and reader. And they're very, very broad in nature. So, but we also have what's called predefined roles. If you're thinking least privilege, we have a set of predefined roles that give you finer grain access control. They give you much finer grain access control than basic roles. And then our third role is a custom role. So let's say you create a pub sub viewer role, but you find out that of the permissions that's in pub sub viewer, I don't want Chris to have these last two permissions. I would create a custom role based on that predefined role, and now Chris can do everything with this custom role except these last two things. So we started out with pub sub viewer, but we stripped away two permissions off of that, and we created a custom role. And so now that is something that is more bespoke for our organization. And where might
that be useful? Say you have multiple lines of business and you want to have that type of role. You use it and you fork it. So maybe you have, say, at SAP, you have SuccessFactors and you have Ariba and you have Concur, and you want to separate those pub sub roles to each one. Then it's self-documenting because you've copied a predefined role, and it has, what do you think I'm going to say?
Least privilege.
Yes, least privilege. So remember how we talked about basic or primitive roles are bad? Well, here's why. Look at the number of permissions. This is why we're saying that you really want to use predefined or custom roles, because look at the number of permissions over here. You're talking thousands, over 8,000, over 7,000, and 3,500, right? But then you look at the predefined roles, way less, way, way less. So let's talk some security guardrails, right? Defense in depth. Security is like an onion. That's why it makes you cry. But what you're doing is you're going from the inside out with defense in depth, right? So you're going to use a combination of IAM allow policies, IAM deny policies, and also organization policies. And the way you can refine these, you're going to use your policy intelligence suite, which is going to help you identify how you can nail those down, right? How you can get them really tight.
So Michele started out in the previous slide talking about defense in depth. And most of the time when we think about IAM, we don't really think about the fact that we think about security writ large as a defense in depth approach. That's the best way to approach it. But in IAM, we even have defense in depth with IAM. And so the first thing we'll talk about are these allow policies. And these allow policies, I spoke about it earlier. This is a collection of role bindings and the metadata that you would assign to an actual, that says what a person or an entity will be allowed to do. Now, the main thing I want to mention here about our policies, whether it's allow, deny, or org policies, is that our policies, all Google policies, are what's called eventually consistent. Let me let that soak in.
It's really important.
Eventual consistency means that when you make a change, when you implement a change, whether via an allow policy, a deny policy, or an org policy, those changes may not be readily available immediately when you make the change. Because especially depending on the size of the organization, you may need to allow sufficient time for the changes to propagate throughout the organization. So remember that all of our policies, allow, deny, and org policies are what? Eventually consistent.
Don't be impatient like Michele.
Michelle, very impatient, very impatient.
And then we have deny policies. And you're probably thinking to yourself, why do we need deny policies? We have allow policies, and it's going to still evaluate it and deny access. Well, Elliott, my friend Elliott here, has a really good expression. He says that a deny policy is like a scalpel.
Scalpel.
And it really is. And I'll give you an example of that, but look at the order of operations first. You'll notice that deny rules are checked first, just like a firewall.
Just like a firewall.
Just like a firewall, right? Because it's fast. So hits a deny, exits, right? But the important thing to remember here is that you will have situations, maybe, here's an example. You have a probationary period for cloud engineers or platform engineers, right? And you don't want to give that person, you want them to be able to do their job, but you don't want to give them access to production until that probationary period is over. You could use a deny policy with, a tag, which is a key value pair that says, status equals probation, and then just for that period, you could have automation that comes in and takes that status off of that person. And for this reason, then you can protect your environment a little bit more, right? From, people who are newer and still getting, attuned to the environment so that they don't have any whoopsies. And yes, that is a technical term, having a whoopsie in a production environment. But let's talk about organization policies and what they actually are.
So if a deny policy is a scalpel, I think that an org policy can be more of a blunt instrument because it applies everywhere in the organization where you apply it in the resource hierarchy. Our org policies operate on the principle of what was called a constraint. A constraint is basically a template of actions basically these are templates these are actions that constrain or restrict what a principle is allowed to do. So, for example, in Michele's fictitious world of Lord of the Rings, everyone in Middle Earth has access to the precious, the ring. But assuming that there's someone in Middle Earth that has a buddy in Land of the Sun, they want to give someone Land of the Sun access to the precious, the ring, right? But now Elliott comes along and said, hey, no, Michele, that's not cool. I don't want anyone from Land of the Sun to access our vital resources in Middle Earth. We could implement an org policy constraint that I'm going to show you now. Let's go to the next screen.
Yeah, and just a reminder, the IAM deny and allow policies are the who, org policies are the what, right?
And so now, if you look at this very first constraint, we're only showing you, we have over 250 predefined constraints in GCP, but I just want to talk about the first one here. So I don't want anyone from Land of the Sun accessing Middle Earth resources. So if I implement this constraint called domain restricted sharing, what that does is that prevents anyone outside of your organization from getting access to, from logging into your console, or from doing anything cloud-related in your environment. Domain-restricted sharing is a very, very critical constraint to memorize. And here are some others that we've listed here. For example, if you don't want to create a service account key, which is bad, you can implement that particular constraint there as well.
Spoiler. We've got a demo coming up, but on that topic. But just a quick overview of what service accounts are. If people aren't familiar with those, they're non-human identities, right? They're non-interactive accounts that you use, for an application or a virtual machine. They're project specific, but they can be granted access to other projects. They can be associated with a key pair, okay? Not our favorite thing, but yes, they can be associated with a key pair. And you want to try to avoid assigning IAM users a service account or token creator role. But we're going to talk about that. Well, Elliott is now.
So here's a demo.
Uh-oh. He broke it.
I broke the demo.
The demo gods have spoken.
I know they have.
They have spoken and they are angry. The demo gods are angry.
It's trying.
No, it's playing, but we just need to, if the control booth can give us some volume.
You're getting music.
It's not me. So
Can't hear it.
it's playing now. Just give some volume.
This is where Elliott does his interpretive dance of IAM.
So I'll talk through it. So what we're showing here is we're creating a demo. I created this demo to show us org policies and service account key creation. So in this environment, you have to first create an org policy and make sure that you're at the appropriate level in the resource hierarchy. Because you can apply an org policy constraint at the org level, at the folder level, or at the project level. So you want to make sure that you're applying the constraint at the appropriate level. If I want it to be organization-wide, guess what? I'm going to put it at the organization level. If I only want it to be at the folder or project level, I will apply that constraint at that appropriate level. So in this example, one of the things that I don't want to do is I don't want any of our users to create a service account key. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a constraint and I'm going to make sure, see right now you see that it's not enforced. So what I'm going to do is click Manage Policy. I'm going to go down and I'm going to enforce this policy. I'm going to make sure that it's enforced. I'm going to click Done, and I'm going to accept that policy. And now you'll see that it's now enforced. And so now, when I go to try to create a service account, I'm going to create a service account, and I'm going to attempt to create a service account key. If the demo gods are smiling on Elliott today in this pre-recorded video, then what should happen? What should happen is that the service account key creation will fail. And I promise you there is sound that goes, there is audio, and it's a beautiful soundtrack. It's a beautiful melody that I wrote that accompanies this particular demo. But I'm just creating a basic service account, just giving it a basic role. And after I've given it a basic role, I think I'm giving it something like owner. I kid. I'm giving it a viewer role. So I'm going to create a service account, you want to make sure that when you create a service account that you give it a naming, follow a naming convention, and then that you also only apply the role that you want that service account to have. You want to make sure that you restrict that service account. And the reason why this is important is because a lot of customers are calling us complaining about, hey, I'm auditing my accounts now and I see editor everywhere. I didn't create all of these editors. You didn't create a lot of editors, but what you did do is you used the default compute engine service account, right? And the default compute engine service account has the editor role. And so as you can see,
least privilege.
I just tried to do it and it failed because now I'm going to create my key. I'm creating my key. Make sure it's of JSON type. Going to click create. Boom. Service account key creation is disabled. Come on.
Yay, Elliott's demo.
Elliott's demo worked. And so that is that for the demo.
There we go. Okay, let's talk some best practices. Why is this not moving now? Clicker. There we go. Some do's. Do create principles that implement least privilege, the principles of least privilege and separation of duties, right? That's what it's there for. Do rotate any service account keys created. I mean, we don't like them, but if you are going to use them, then make sure you rotate them. Make sure your service accounts don't have admin privileges. Clearly, the default editor role is too much. Do use conditional role bindings to grant temporary elevated access that expires immediately. If you want to grant somebody access to prod, then that should be temporary if it's not something they need as a standard part of their job, right? Do grant privileged access on a just-in-time basis where possible. If you need to give somebody access to a production environment or application, who has a support role from outside your organization, there's a reason that you want to do it on a just-in-time basis. And then do use MFA for non-service accounts. It's just not working.
The clicker failed us. The clicker has failed.
So we're just having a day.
The clicker has failed. So what are some don'ts? So don't use service account keys unless absolutely necessary. If you guys haven't already checked it on your agenda, look at the session on workload identity federations. If you need to have external access into GCP, workload identity federation provides a very, very seamless way to do that. You can still leverage service account, but you don't have to use these pesky service account keys. So don't use service account keys unless absolutely necessary. Don't use the primitive or basic roles, especially in production, because they are very, very overly permissive. You want to use your predefined and your custom roles. Don't think that you can just set it and forget it with your IAM. This is something that my good friend Michele, a phrase that she used, and I've stolen it from her. She'll never get it back. But don't think that with IAM, you can just set it and forget it. That is a legacy mindset that we refer to, my friend Ahmad and I refer to as a pets versus cattle mindset. Thinking you can just set it and forget it. You don't want to do that. Don't put service account keys in your cloud functions, your code repos. Don't put it anywhere in your code, your cloud function variables, because it will get found and the bad guy will use it. And finally, don't apply org policy constraints do not apply org policy constraints in production without properly testing them out first.
Yeah, it's not working. Okay, now the fun part, troubleshooting, yay. That's why we're here, right? So you want to attain least privilege, right? So how do you do that? You need to make sure that access is appropriate to your business needs. What's safe to remove? I don't know. What users what will they need in the future? What's recommended? How do you get a good understanding of risk? It's so much, it's so much. What do I do, Elliott? I have the policy intelligence suite. Look at that. You have IAM recommender. Each role recommendation suggests what you remove or replace. That gives principals, that if a principal has excess permissions, so you can take it away, right? But you need 90 days of data to do this. You have policy analyzer, which is your auditor's best friend, your security professional's best friend, right? It can look and you can determine who has what permissions. You have policy simulator, which will show you the impact that a change will have. That is awesome, right? And then you have policy troubleshooter, which, some developer comes to you and they're like, I can't get to this bucket, I can't do this, why not? Fix it, fix it, fix it. And this helps you do that. Okay, first, this is a screenshot. These are screenshots from IAM Recommender. Again, it needs 90 days of data, but you get an idea of what it's going to look like, right? The red is obviously what's not recommended, right?
And so with Recommender, and Recommender is great because we're talking about least privilege, right? And you've done your persona mapping at the beginning before you started creating all of these user accounts and groups and all that stuff. So you've created your persona matrix, your persona mapping, and now you look at it and you find out that Eli is still overly permissive on the role that we've given him. So with policy and with Recommender, with 90 days of data, we get AI-enabled ability to look at this and find and tell us that of the roles that he has, he's not using all of these other permissions. So we can remove those permissions, and we can actually create a more specific role based on what Recommender is highlighting here for us. So Recommender is great for that. Clicker working again?
No, it's not working.
There you go.
There we go. And here's IAM Policy Analyzer, which is just a set of templated queries. We're not going to spend too much time on some of these because we have another wonderful Elliott demo. Let's get to that demo. Here's Policy Simulator, some slides from that. So you'll see, again, it's doing a dry run, okay? Again, more policy simulator. You'll see it's actually telling you what it's going to change. And finally, policy troubleshooter, but you're going to see a demo on this. Go ahead and let's just skip to, yeah. Yeah, here's a great demo, and you'll probably have to talk through this one as well.
Okay, you've already explained.
That's okay. We all like Elliott's voice.
Let's take a look at a couple of these tools in action. First, we'll take a look at policy troubleshooter. With policy troubleshooter, you just simply put in the principal name.
That's me!
What is the resource that this principal is trying to access? And for this demonstration, we'll access a GCS bucket. You can find the full resource names at this particular page here on Google Cloud Docs. So I'm going to put in, copy and paste this particular resource name, and then all I'll need to do is to add in my bucket ID, which I happen to know what it is. And then once that is correct and in there, I can check and see if this particular resource, I'll check access, and voila, access is granted, which means that this particular principal can access this resource with this permission. This resource can do a storage bucket update, and that's because there is no deny policy in effect, and there is a allow policy which grants this access, so this access has been granted. That is policy troubleshooter. Let's take a look at policy analyzer. Policy analyzer is really good. One of the great questions, one of the most frequent questions that I always get asked from my customers is, how can I tell when I last used a service account or a service account key? Now, this is critical when you're doing account hygiene and cleaning up your account. So what you would simply do is click here. This is in preview right now, and it will be GA at some point, but continue to watch this space, because you would just simply put in the name of the service account, the project in the service account name, and then you just simply run your query. And as you can see, this is when it was last used. With this intelligence, you can now be reasonably assured of when the service account or service account key was last used, and if you need to use that information to govern whether or not you can clean up that service account or that service account key. So we've taken a look at the policy troubleshooter, policy analyzer. These are tools in our ever-growing suite of policy intelligence tools. Use these to help you gain greater clarity and insight into your identity and access management, and get greater control and security over your environment.
Super helpful, super helpful. It's good to have those tools.
Okay.
Okay.
There we go.
No clicker. What can we do without the clicker?
There we go.
Final thoughts. Okay. Here we go. The boundary of cloud is one of identity. I think we've made that point multiple times here. You want to apply a defense in depth approach to controls. And, oh, by the way, essential contacts. Please, please, please configure those. That's how Google gets a hold of you. It's not strictly identity, but it kind of is, so I threw it in. The core principles for access control are least privilege and separation of duties, right? You want to have as much granular access for a person, for an identity or a principal as possible, and you want to base it on what their actual duties are, right? Based on what? Persona mapping, right? Use groups when granting rights in IAM. That's what they're there for. Please do that. It's self-documenting. You want to go granular and specific with IAM. And remember that access changes are what? Eventually consistent, right? They're listening. Oh, that's so great.
I remember.
We did have a cheat sheet up, though, you know. Inheritance, please remember inheritance. That recently made us a little nuts on something. So in general, It applies to a resource hierarchy, but sometimes there are exceptions depending on how it's configured. And granting the owner role to a principal will allow them to access and modify almost all the resources. You really do not want to use those basic roles whenever possible. They're just too overly permissive, especially the owner role. And I think we're done.
So we're gonna open it up for questions now, but I want to give you guys just a real world. You guys came here because you want to hear some real stuff. So eventual consistency is very real, and you need to, particularly with your org policy constraints, make sure that you are applying it at the appropriate level in the resource hierarchy. So here's some best practices around that. When you go into, in order to create an org policy constraint, you didn't hear it from the demo, but it's in there, but you need to have an org policy administrator role first. You cannot make any changes to org policy without having the org policy administrator role. Now, if once you apply a constraint, which can be of two types, either a list or a Boolean, it could be a list or a Boolean constraint. Once you apply the constraint at the appropriate level, let's say I apply the constraint at the organization level, I strongly encourage you to also check your folder structure as well. So if you want to make sure that you go to the folder and make sure that it says inherited. Make sure that it says inherited. Then go to the project where the resources are that you're concerned about and make sure that says inherited. And if it doesn't, what you're going to need to do is you're going to click a little radio button that says inherit from parent. Okay? You're going to make sure you're going to need to click that button that says inherit from parent, because if you don't, you think it's eventual consistency is taking forever. I made this change 3 weeks ago and it's still not working. Well, the reason it's not working is because it was never inherited. Right. So you need to make sure that the inheritance is appropriate and that you verify. You verify that I set it at the org level, it inherited it at the folder level, and it also inherited it at the project level as well. Make sure you do that. So,
Questions?
I used to have an afro. Until I started working on this stuff, and it drove me nuts. First question.
So let's make sure the mic is working. There it is. Hello, everyone. So your last comment about making sure at every level. What about organizations at scale? We have 7,000 projects and a bunch of OUs and respective units, right? Doing that manually is not exactly the best of options, right? Are there automated solutions that the audience may want to know about, or something that Google has in the pipeline that would help a security team be able to properly enforce those levels of inheritance?
So in order to, for the levels of inheritance, so regardless of the size and scale of your organization, the principle of inheritance still applies. It still flows from the top down, the organization level, the folder level, and the folders can be nested up to 10 layers deep. So and that's why we need to keep eventual consistency in our mind, because depending on the size of a massive organization like that, then sometimes that propagation is going to take some time to occur. But as far as an automated way to make that make the propagation occur faster, there's not anything that there is another session specifically on org policies that the product team, the product managers are doing later this afternoon. So make sure you look for that with Akshay and Florian. Yes, next question.
So with when you're setting up roles and permissions, is there a reference for what permissions go to what roles? Because I find that the tools are very good at telling me what permissions I need, but then I have to guess because I can only assign roles and I don't know how they map. And sometimes it takes a while to figure out which roles have what.
Oh, that's a very good question. Is there a way for me to determine what permissions are on a given role? That's a very good question, and we actually have that documented. It's well documented on our site. So you can go from the UI, you can click on roles, and then you'll see all of the permissions that are associated with a given role.
And if you find problems with that, you should open a bug and let us know, because that's DevRel likes to address those issues of customer friction.
Thank you.
Two more.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm interested in understanding if the IAM role recommender or the policy analyzer apply to Google Workspace permissions. All the examples I saw were for GCP, like cloud. So specifically the role recommender.
I don't think we've made this available in Workspace yet, have we? No, it's only for the platform. This is all for the GCP
And that's
platform.
interesting that you're asking that. I mean, you should hit me up. Again, that's something DevRel can try to help, if that's something we can do, we can bring it to product.
Because the same problem exists in Google Workspace, right? There are users, roles, admins, groups.
Right.
And how do we recommend permissions based on usage?
Yeah.
That's a very good question. So we'll take that. Follow us, find us after the session, and we'll.
We can do something with product management.
So we got 30 more seconds, and then they're going to give us
I have the references.
Yes.
Take a picture of that references slide. Okay.
Hello. See, my team, we manage hundreds of projects that include GCP projects, that includes IAM access provisioning to various different teams, service accounts, AAD groups, many different things. Is there a recommendation from Google for checking permissions? We have to go to individual projects console and check for IAM permissions. Is there any recommendation from Google for implementing something like a central data store where we can just see all the permissions we granted across all hundreds of projects we manage?
So is there a central way to see where permissions have been granted? So that's where policy intelligence comes in. I hate that we had to rush through that, but you want to look at policy troubleshooter to determine if, hey, I can't access this thing. I should be able to. You put in the user's credentials, and then you can check based on what they're trying to do, or you can look at Analyzer to see who can change firewall rules in my environment and a lot of other things. But policy intelligence is going to be the best place for you to start. I think we're getting the hook.
Yeah, we're getting the hook.
But follow us. Don't go anywhere.
You get a cushion though.
Don't go anywhere. You guys can. We'll still stick around to answer your questions. But I also want to encourage you to go to the learning.
Stuff.
Is it the learning? Go over to the learning. Go over to the learning center and Prashant, raise your hand. If you guys are interested in getting a Google certification, Prashant wrote an excellent book. He's going to be signing that book maybe today, but you can get a discount coupon if you find him over in the Learning Center.
Say nice things about us.
Say beautiful things. Thank you.